Hi, I'm John Mark. Welcome to the Beaten Zone. This podcast is about war, not from the top down, but from the ground up. It's about unearthing personal truths of war, its costs, and how it shapes the lives of the people who experienced it firsthand. This week, we continue our series on Blackhawk Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Infantry Regiment, deployed to northern Iraq from late 2003 to late 2004. My guest is Joe Troutman, a retired staff sergeant who served in Blackhawk Company during that deployment. Joe brings us the view from the NCOs and soldiers who fought in the tough streets of Samarra and Mosul. As with every conflict, any account of war is incomplete without including the day-to-day experiences and unfiltered opinions of enlisted soldiers. Too often, our understanding is shaped by only officer perspectives. One of the goals of this project is to flip that on its head. What makes this episode so exciting for me is that Joe is more than a veteran. He's an author, and a damn good one at that. His book, Gods of War, is an underappreciated masterpiece of combat storytelling. It's raw, unflinching, and captures not just the tactical detail, but the emotional truth of that deployment, from train up to redeployment, triumph to tragedy, exhilaration to boredom, laughter to anger. Joe captures it all. And I've added more about his book in the comments below. Check it out. It's said that NCOs are the backbone of the Army. Anyone who served in its ranks knows this is true. If you haven't, today's conversation with Joe will help you understand what this expression really means. And now here's my conversation with the legend, Joe Troutman. All right, Joe. So Blackhawk Company, you guys are at the National Training Center, just having completed your rotation, and you're in your unit after action review, which is kind of like, for those who aren't in the military, it's kind of like when the graders of the exercise sit down and they give you your report card. So what do they tell you?
They basically told us that we were the worst unit that has ever come through the National Training Center at the company level. It was an absolute gut punch for the soldiers, for the leaders, for the entire organization.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What were some of the things they told you? What was some of the more specific feedback?
So during the time at NTC, we were often late to the battle. If we even made it to the objective at all. We had a hard time communicating. We had a hard time just operating as a functional unit. Like, there was so much dysfunction from the top down that the orders never got processed, and we looked bad. I mean, most of the time the soldiers on the ground didn't even know what we were supposed to be doing, because information dissemination was just non-existent during that rotation from the company commander.
Yeah, and what you're describing are core leadership kind of actions. So as we learned from Rob last week and reading in the book, you guys ended up having to go to the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana for basically a back-to-back exam. I've never heard of that ever in the history of in my 24 years in the Army.
Well,
you talk a little bit about that and how the unit reacted to it.
There's a couple things that were going on there. So the war in Iraq kicked off while we were boots on the ground on NTC. Mm-hmm. So we knew that it was coming around the corner. There was a lot of politics that were going on with the Strike Brigade as well. A lot of things from Big Army in Washington, D.C. that were being funneled down on, a lot of people, a lot of naysayers who didn't want the Stryker Brigade to succeed, and a lot of people who said we're using the NTC rotation as proof to say, hey, these guys aren't ready. This concept's not ready. We're going to go ahead and scrap it. They gave us one more chance and basically said, we found out why we were getting ready to leave NTC. We were going to JRTC. So it's never fun. I've never heard of anybody going to NTC and JRTC back to back, but the strikers never actually went home. They were railheaded to the port, sent off to Louisiana on a boat. The soldiers went home. I had like 4 days back home station before I was sent to JRTC as part of the advance party.
Yeah, and I think that an important piece of context here is that this wasn't like you guys showed up and went to train. This was the culmination of a 2-year train up for the team. And so I can only imagine how your soldiers must have felt knowing that they had invested so much into the train up and wanted to basically showcase their capabilities as war fighters, showcase the strikers' capabilities. And that must have been just a real bitter pill to swallow.
It was so much more than that because we had spent so much time together. I mean, people, you don't get to understand it because I don't know of any other unit that I've ever heard of that spent as much time training and building something. I mean, we took a completely new warfighting concept, something that had never, ever in the history of the Army been done, built it from the ground up with the vehicles. And I mean, the doctrine was completely different than anything else as well. So we spent 2 years in the field pretty much, missing families, missing birthdays, missing anniversaries, training in the field, going to Yakima Training Center, which is in Washington State, back to back to back, like 4 or 5 different times in 2 years, in addition to 30-day field problems at Fort Lewis, 2 weeks in the field, going out to the ranges and gunnery, STX, and then going out to NTC and falling flat on our faces. It was a kick to a lot of egos.
Yeah. But the good news is that you guys perform very well at JRTC up against a notoriously difficult enemy opposition force, Geronimo. Talk to me a little bit about how you performed and a little bit about the sort of the tactical kind of actions you had against Geronimo.
All right. So if we're going to talk about that, we got to go back to the differences between NTC and JRTC. So NTC was this Cold War era style battle with T-72s and Burnhams and Hips and Hinds versus the Strikers. And we were not built for that. We weren't built for a standalone tanks on the ground, everybody online, fight in the open desert, because that's not how the Strikers operated. We operated with speed and are dropping our dismounts off and taking the fight to the enemy. So it was a completely I mean, in some ways, we weren't even set up to win. It was almost like we were set up to lose at NTC. And then we get the JRTC, and the fight's a little less centralized. It's down to the team leader. It's down to the squad level. And that fight affords you a lot less command structure, and we didn't really need to operate on guidance from the company commander so much as you kind of do at NTC. So when we were fighting the engagements against the Op 4 down at JRTC, that squad leader, that platoon leader, he's making a decision on his own as the battles are coming forth. And from there, it's just platoon, squad, battle drills that are taken over, and we took the fight to the enemy. I mean, they didn't have an answer for what we were bringing to the table. They couldn't hear our strikers. They couldn't keep up with the speed. I mean, people don't understand how fast a striker goes. We could go 40, 50, 60 miles an hour and get to the battlefield, drop our dismounts off, set up an overwatch, and before they even knew what hit them.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people would hear that and they would say, double underline answer, striker good. And certainly the striker proved its capabilities at JRTC. But I would take it a step further and say the more nuanced answer is that your troops, your team leaders, squad leaders, platoon sergeants had this huge train up and they learned how to fight. And when you talk about decentralized, it's all about initiative. It's about taking risk, about agility. Like, to me, that is the answer. You guys went out and you had this very rigorous train up and you knew what you were doing at the lower levels.
Well, I mean, once you take all of the dysfunction that happened with the leadership changeover, I mean, 60 to 90 days before we went to NTC, the entire senior leadership of our company changed out at one time. All of the platoon sergeants got promoted to E8 at the same time during the same month. So we lost 3 platoon sergeants. We lost our first sergeant. We changed out XOs, and then we got a new company commander. There's going to be a transitional period no matter what. Even if everybody's good, there's going to be that transitional period. If you throw in the fact that the company commander was not so good, it almost crippled the unit. And it's a testament to how good the junior NCOs were in our unit that we were able to recover some of it's going back to the training and some of it's the train up. But the fact that we had done this so much, I think given the opportunity, which we were at JRTC, we were able to right the ship.
It's the story of the Army in so many ways, man. That bad planning, in some cases, bad leadership. The guys on the ground always seem to find a way to get the mission done. And the story can't be told over and over and over again. It's always the junior NCOs, the team leaders, the squad leaders, pulling it all together and making it happen. And for the folks who aren't in the military, just a little context here, those are also the folks in that value chain that get paid the least and have the highest amount of time in service. That's something that a lot of people in the private sector can't quite wrap their head around, is that the people in that chain who provide the most value to the organization, meaning the difference makers in victory or defeat, are the ones who get compensated the least. Unfair? Is that an unfair judgment, or
no? That seems pretty accurate. That seems pretty accurate.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is that I've never taken part in an operation where a brilliant plan was the difference maker. It all comes down to the tip of the spear and execution every single time.
100%.
Let's talk a little bit now about going back to Lewis, and you guys get your deployment order. I think you said July is when you guys got your official deployment order, even though you all knew you were going to go downrange at some point. There was a real big event in the history of Blackhawk Company, and that is Captain Robinson assuming command of the company. Can you provide a little context to that? He talked about it a little bit, but I want to hear from the NCO perspective how that all played out.
So we get our deployment orders in the middle of, I mean, we got to go back a little bit further than that too. So when we get back from JRTC, the higher up, the battalion level, regimental level leadership, they basically told our commander at the time, you got to get control of your company. You're losing it. We want to see more leadership from you. He actually decided the way he was going to do that was to give almost all the NCOs in the company Article 15s for violating a made-up order. So there was a lot of tension that was there. Throw that into the fact that right after that incident happened, we get our deployment orders. We know we're going to Iraq now. It's set in stone. And then other things had happened, and the NCOs in Blackhawk Company, we all got together and we were basically like, we cannot go to war with this guy. So we set up a meeting with the SAR Major, who was not happy at all with us. He didn't even really want to hear what we had to say. But when we started laying it out, and every single NCO in the company's telling him, if we deploy with this guy, we're going to die. He is not capable of functioning and doing the things we need to do. So that got brought up to the battalion level. That got sent up to the regimental level. We didn't hear anything else from it, but we got a new commander. So obviously it must have made a difference, but it was, it's not something you hear of. It's not something you hear of every day. It's not something I would recommend to anybody else. That's for sure.
I think there's a really important lesson here, Joe. I think that a lot of people outside the military have this idea that they're robots, that soldiers are robots. They take orders and they go off and do it. And it's just not like that. At the end of the day, we're leading human beings. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of speaking your mind about what I would consider to be dissent in a military context? Because, it resulted in you guys getting according to what you wrote in the book, a good company commander. You probably saved lives. For junior NCOs, junior officers who are listening to this, what's the right? Looking back, would you have done it differently? How do you kind of think about that dissent?
The result was great. Probably the way we went about it was wrong. And you could say that 20 years later, and at the time it felt absolutely right because we didn't feel like we had any other options. because we had voiced our concerns. We had said what we needed to said. The results for the training centers had spoken for themselves, along with some of the other things. But at the end of the day, that should never be the answer. You know what I mean? We should have found a better way to deal with it, but the stress of combat looming and everything else dictated the need for what we had to do.
And I think a lot of our listeners who weren't in the military, like, it's forget about like the, retribution. That's the easily identifiable answer, right? But it's about if in fact they hadn't acted and you went downrange with your leadership, trust and communications between leadership and the soldiers would have probably been degraded. And I would almost say it's almost certain, based upon everything that you guys went through, you probably would have come back with a lot more casualties because of that. Fair?
100%. There's no way that we were successful. And I know that we ended up losing some dudes, but it wasn't really in the context of a gunfight. And we'll get into that later, but there's no doubt in my mind, if we had that company commander when we went to war, that we would have made it back and been near as successful as we were.
Great. So, great segue. We're going to talk about a tough topic now. So, we're going to now talk about Samara. Last week, Rob told us about the rollover that resulted in the loss of 3 of your teammates. Before we talk about what happened, can you tell me about the guys?
Absolutely. So I was the 3rd platoon FO for the better part of a year and a half. So I was basically that platoon's FO. I got promoted to the company FSNCO when we were in Kuwait a couple of days before we rolled into Iraq. So all the way up until a week or two before the incident, I was in that platoon. So I knew the guys well. Staff Sergeant Bridges, he was the old man of the company, basically, but he was the guy that you went to for advice. He was the guy who knew every single thing. He was the guy that no matter what the problem was, this dude has the answer to fix it, So he was a huge part of what made, 3rd Platoon was the best platoon in our company by far. And he was a huge part of that because he was the guy who was like, he wasn't the yeller, he wasn't the screamer. He's the guy that's going to pull you off to the side and he's going to teach you by the numbers until you get it right. You know what I mean? He did what he needed to do to make Blackhawk Company successful. But he was also the guy who had the troops at his house for Thanksgiving and the troops at his house for Christmas and making sure that nobody did anything by themselves. That's the kind of guy that Steve was. And I say it in the book. He was like working with your uncle in the garage fixing cars on the weekend where there's no pressure, but you learn so much. Wesley, the driver for Blackhawk 3-3, he was just a great young soldier. The dude would do anything that you told him to do. And, because I was so young, I was still a young NCO, a lot of the soldiers, they would talk to me all the time and we'd hang out and do stuff. Me and him used to play chess on the back of the Strikers. He was the prototypical soldier that you would want to have where you tell him what to do, and there's not even a question, it just gets done. Blickenstaff had a tough run in the Army. Blickenstaff was the guy who was always kind of like teetering on the edge of getting in trouble, and some of the home life stuff would get him in and out of trouble. But he was the one I connected with the most because we had a lot of shared interests, and I saw a lot of myself in Blickenstaff. And a lot of people don't know, but me and Blickenstaff used to hang out a lot when we were not at work because we would go sing karaoke. We would just, you know what I mean? I knew him really well. Out of the 3 guys, I knew Blickenstaff the most. So those guys, were integral parts of our entire company. So that loss was humongous. And when the incident happened and everything happened, and I was talking with Paul Schmitz about this just today, actually. Like, it wasn't just when you lose somebody and you lose soldiers in combat, everyone feels the pinch. But because of the way that it went down and the way that everybody felt this giant guilt because we were so close and we were such a big family, like we had all done something wrong. maybe we hadn't shared something we learned. Maybe some of the drivers didn't share. You know what I mean? It was at every single level, and everybody in the platoon felt this guilt and this shame, like we had somehow let these guys down. And that's something that some of us still carry with us to this day. I mean, I put Armistead in that platoon as my replacement a week after I got promoted, and he was part of that. And when he came back, that the night that he came back, he had this look on his face like he was gone, like he was lost, like he was crying, and I didn't know what to tell him. I had no answer because I was like, man, if I would have been there, maybe something else would, you know what I mean? I had my own guilt and my own shame, and the only thing I could do is just give the dude a giant bear hug and tell him, I got you from here. And that moment, and I can't speak for everybody else, but that moment changed me as a non-commissioned officer, because in that moment, out is the yelling and the screaming of the old army and the you do as I say, and in was I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make sure I don't ever feel like this again, and to make sure that every single guy that I have comes back to the best of my ability. And it made me so much better of an NCO, but it hurt so bad.
Yeah. What happened?
So on our very first combat mission, we were rolling out to go do a simple cordon and snatch and grab, and they took a different route. It had been talked about, but at the last minute they had made the change. They were going on this irrigation canal. I mean, and you got to understand, like, it was not dark, but it wasn't, the sun was still down, up, but not down. So it wasn't quite not night vision goggles, but you couldn't see anything because the sun was going down. So they couldn't see anything. The drainage canal was small. It was like 100 years old and was usually used for donkey carts. So the ground just gave way. And like every report that I've read and talking with the guys, the soldiers did what they were trained to do. The drivers did what they were trained to do. The squad leaders did what they trained to do. Had they not done what they were trained to do, every one in those vehicles would be dead right now. The vehicles, 2 of the 4 vehicles in the platoon rolled into the canal. And, you know, after that, the guys drop down on the ground. It goes from a combat mission to, you know, a life-saving mission. The dudes were in the back of those Strykers were still stuck in the Strykers. So they're underwater. They're not knowing if they're even going to make it out of the vehicles. The guys who are the rest of the platoon doesn't know if they're going to make it out of the vehicles. They hop out on the ground, jump in the water. Some of them still with all their full combat gear and weapons on to try to save lives. And if they delayed it all, I don't know if those guys make it out.
Yeah. And for our listeners at home, these vehicles are, we talked about them being more lightweight than a tank and a Bradley, but these are armored vehicles. Like they would sink into the water, into the mud. I mean, I can imagine how difficult of a situation that would be in the dark, fighting the mud with cold water.
Steel. They added a bird cage around it. That was an RPG repellent. That was basically a bunch of steel bars, and it added a lot of weight to the vehicles as well. So that added to a lot of the functionality, because we didn't have a lot of drive time with the slat armor on as well. So, I mean, that extra weight added to them trying to get the doors open in the back when the vehicles rolled over into the canal as well. Because, I mean, it probably weighed 300 pounds to try to get that door open.
Yeah. So you mentioned it was the very first mission. I mean, that's a huge gut punch. Can you talk to me a little bit about, like, you mentioned a little bit about what the guys were feeling and how you kind of dealt with that. My experience with soldiers in combat is that they tend to be kind of superstitious. Like we say, oh boy, this is going to be a long year, because you had a full year ahead of you. Was there like a feeling like this is going to be a horrible year for the company?
You know, there really wasn't. It was kind of like the opposite. 3rd Platoon, you know, we didn't have a lot of time. We still had combat operations. We were still expected to do X, Y, and Z. 3rd Platoon had a little safety stand down, and then you have to go back to work. And I think in some ways, getting those guys back out there as fast as they did actually helped them, because it didn't give them the time to process fully what had happened. You know what I mean? Like, hey, we're going to go straight back to work and you're worried about staying alive and you don't have time to think about it. And like we as soldiers shove down everything in the world because you're supposed to be tough and you're supposed to be Superman. You deal with it later. And that's kind of what happened is the company as a collective, especially after we had the memorial, we were like, you know what? We're not losing another dude. We're going to do whatever we have to do to make this happen. And it gelled us into, I mean, it was already in some ways Blackhawk Company against everybody else anyhow. And then after that incident happened and everybody wanted to talk smack about everything, it was absolutely us against them for the rest of the deployment.
Yeah. For those folks, you mentioned the memorial service. For the folks at home who have never served in the military or have never deployed into a combat zone and experienced loss like Blackhawk Company, could you talk a little bit about the memorial service? What's involved with that and what that's kind of like experiencing
it? It's the worst thing in the world. And we love those guys. And I'm going to tell you, I went to far too many military funerals in my time, way more than I ever would ever want to. And the difference is every memorial service and every funeral service is sad. But when you're sitting in a combat zone and all you think about, it floods back all of those emotions when they set their weapons up with their helmet and their dog tags, and it's at the forefront. And then they talk about everything that they've done, and they talk about everything they went through, and they say basically how good of a job that they had done. And then they do the roll call. That's where they call out their names and then they don't answer. And it's just like getting punched in the face. And then they start playing taps. And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a Navy SEAL operator or anybody else. When they start playing taps and that's a dude, you know, the tears start flowing. You get that choked up feeling in your throat. It's not fun. It hurts. And it hurts on a level that if you've never experienced it, you'll never, ever understand. That's your time to say goodbye. And that's kind of like the finality of it is that, hey, these dudes aren't coming back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's important for people at home to understand, and Rob mentioned it and you mentioned it, the weight of going out the door for missions that same day after that happened. From a risk factor, when guys are upset, it's so high. And this is where real leaders, I'm talking about NCOs, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, this is where they make their money, to make sure that the mission gets accomplished, the guys come back, and that you strike that balance of being prepared for the mission and also taking time to take care of your guys. This is where guys like you, Joe, made your money downrange.
I will tell you this, the way that I dealt with it, and this is how I was going to deal with it later. I had a job to do. I had guys that depended on me. I did not have the luxury of being sad in that moment. We had a mission, and even if it was just a simple little, you know what I mean, presence patrol mission, which they put us on at first, there's still all the other factors of you're in a combat zone. There could be IEDs. What happens if we get shot at? I had to, and I'm sure that everybody, I mean, I can't speak to what everybody else says, but I can tell you that a lot of the stories are similar. I got to get my guys ready to go. I don't have the luxury of being sad and worrying about what comes next because I got to make sure everybody comes home. So that was my focus, and that's what I tried to focus on with the guys is, hey, let's get this one mission done. Let's get out the door and get one successful patrol in, and then we'll deal with what comes next. One day at a time, one mission at a time, one dismount at a time. Whatever happens, we'll deal with it when it comes, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. We're gonna move on, Joe. I appreciate you being willing to talk about that. I know it's not easy. We're Blackhawk Company now gets a change of mission, and you guys are heading up to Mosul. Did you know that you were heading up to Mosul the whole time, that Samarra was kind of a temporary staging ground, or is that something that kind of came out of the blue?
No. So actually the plan wasn't for us to roll in the country until after the first of the year, and we were always going to go up to Mosul. What changed was 4th ID started getting hammered, and we happened to be the shiny new toy that everybody wanted to prove could work or couldn't work. So we got to change the mission while we were in Kuwait and got sent to FOB Pace Center to work around Samara.
Got it. So you guys load up and you mount up and then you head up to Mosul. For our listeners back home, and I had to go back and look into the history a little bit. And by the way, Joe does a great job of providing kind of operational level context, what's going on in the rest of the country. There's a lot of violence in April of 2004, down south primarily, in the Baghdad belts, Anbar, south of Baghdad. And a lot of it's, of course, the Muqtada al-Sadr inciting a lot of violence. And so there's a lot going on in the country at the time. How did that manifest itself in Mosul when you guys ripped out with 101st and started? Were you seeing that there? Or was it because it was a different area that didn't really affect you that much?
So it's kind of like a multi-part question. So when the 101st was there, they had seen an escalation of violence, but most of that violence was attributed to former Saddam Ba'ath Party loyalists who always thought Saddam was coming back. So when Saddam got captured, those dudes kind of downshifted and went to ground right around the time when we went up there. So in Mosul, like, there wasn't a lot of attacks, especially against U.S. forces when we took over. Most of it was like sectarian violence, gang-type violence, drive-by shootings, intimidation, murders. And that kind of was the way it was for a few months. And then it started to pick up, and you could feel it on the ground. You could feel that things were different. Like, it wasn't like one day we went to work and we got in massive firefights. It was, oh my God, today they shot at us. You know what I mean? Oh my God, they planted an IED. That's new. Or, hey, these guys are, you know what I mean? You could see that they're filming, and then they would shoot more mortars at the FOB. That was their technique. But you could feel it. And then once April hit, like, that's when we started seeing complex attacks. That's when we started getting into real gunfights. That's when they started really attacking the American forces more than they ever had up to that previous point. And it made the pucker factor just insane, because that's when, like, every single time we roll out the wire, we're getting shot at from somewhere.
Yeah. So you're in Mosul, and we're going to pivot to a little bit of a cooler, fun type of thing. In the month of May, you got promoted in a combat zone. Tell me about your role that you assumed. And I want to hear more about that promotion ceremony.
So I was waiting on the promotion list for almost a year to make E6. The points were maxed out, so I was doing correspondence courses left and right. I mean, even in the combat zone, every extra moment I got, my MWR time wasn't talking to my family. It was online doing correspondence courses, trying to power up these points so I could get promoted. Then the points dropped to like the lowest level possible, and I came down on the list to get promoted. So the day that I get promoted, we're standing in line. My old predecessor had come back to Iraq. He had left in Kuwait, and that's why I took over his position. The day I got promoted, he came back on a Humvee and was standing right there. So I was like, oh, man, this dude's coming back. I'm going to be a staff sergeant working underneath another staff sergeant and a guy who has not a lot of combat experience, so that's not going to be fun. So after the promotion ceremony, they called me and the platoon sergeant and the platoon leader in there. And I thought, they're going to say, hey, this dude's taking back over, thanks for your service, And no, I find out that our platoon sergeant, Sar Wallmeyer, is leaving to go stand up the Iraqi National Guard PLDC Academy they're going to have on FOB Marez. And I was like, well, what does that mean for us? And Captain Rob looks at me. He's like, that means you're the platoon sergeant for 5th Platoon now. And I was like, oh, great. So I had gone from an E5 to an E6 platoon sergeant in that moment.
That's awesome, man. And for folks back home, when you make that leap, and you correct me if I'm wrong, from sergeant to staff sergeant, that's a first big bottleneck, right, in the NCO ranks. That's not one that's given out. You've got to really perform and to be kind of at the top of your game to make that leap in the infantry, or in your case, in the field artillery community?
Well, I mean, it was a hard adjustment, and you're expected, and it's crazy because I had never been a platoon sergeant before. I had just for the first time taken over in Kuwait, my first section as a fire support NCO. So there wasn't a lot of background and there wasn't a lot of training, and you can't go to NCO schools while you're in the middle of combat. So there's no manual that says, hey, this is how you do it. I was doing stuff on the fly and picking the brains of all the other. Thank God we had amazing platoon sergeants in our company that I could call upon and say, hey, what am I supposed to do here? What does this mean? I don't even know how to do this. I mean, I was vastly underqualified for that position.
Oh, I don't think you were vastly underqualified for that position. I think the results bear it out. I think also too, for our folks back home, or sorry, not back home, for our folks listening in, that position is actually coded for Sergeant First Class, which is a rank higher than the one that you served in. Is that correct?
That is correct. The guy I replaced, he was a Sergeant First Class.
Okay. So the Army does not pay you as a Sergeant First Class when you do that, when you serve one grade below. Is that correct?
No.
Well, I'm here.
Not even close.
I promised for this podcast I would not make moral statements, but I'm making one now. The Army must have stepping up pay for leaders who serve in a higher grade, particularly in a combat zone. I feel very strongly about that. I know that you don't do it for the money. I know that's not what you're about, but I do believe that there's a huge responsibility increase when you become a platoon sergeant. And I believe that you should be compensated for it, but that's just a personal opinion of mine. But I know that you're the kind of guys you are, you don't care about that stuff. You just take care of the job.
Right. And you don't even really have time to think about that, because now, instead of having 3 guys you're responsible for, I got 20 guys I'm responsible for. And that creates a whole nother set of things that you have to try to maintain.
Right. And one of the things that being a platoon sergeant, and speaking as a former officer, one of the great benefits of being a platoon sergeant is now you're issued a platoon leader. So we're not going to get into the details about your particular platoon leader. That's not what we're here to do. And also people can read about it in the book.
Right.
For NCOs who will become platoon sergeants, and for platoon leaders who might be listening to this podcast, talk about the relationship between the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant, and really focus in on the role that the platoon sergeant has in making sure that platoon leader is operating the way he or she is supposed to operate. Now,
I mean, it's twofold. And a lot of this stuff I found out later once we got back from combat. When you're in combat is different than your role as a platoon sergeant, in train up and lead it. I mean, you're the expert trainer for that platoon. Your job is to make sure that every single person's trained. The lieutenant, the officer plans the mission. You guys kind of work in conjunction to make everything work. Well, when I took over, I didn't know any of this. I was just trying to focus on making sure that we didn't die. So I was very headstrong in the fact that I was going to look out for the guys. And that's all I've ever known is, you know what I mean? You as a leader, you take care of the guys, you accomplish whatever they tell you to do. I mean, if you do those two things in the Army, I don't care who you are, you're going to be successful. Because if you take care of the guys, they're going to do whatever you need to do. And that in itself is going to take care of the mission. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a lesson I took from that I took the rest of my time in the Army. So you got to kind of have a good relationship, but you're also, the one thing I didn't learn until later on is that you're also a trainer for that officer as well. So you have to kind of teach him the way that the military works and kind of reel him in and say, hey, sir, maybe we should try doing it this way. Hey, sir, this is what they mean when this is what they say. This is what they're actually meaning, and kind of teach him so that you can set that guy up for success. So the better we do and the more training and the better relationship you have with that officer, the better everything's going to be within that platoon. And I mean, if you have a bad climate where the platoon sergeant and the platoon leader don't get along, it affects the men and it affects the soldiers on the ground and it affects the mission. And you got to kind of put your ego aside, especially, I mean, once I got later on in time and I was in, more Platoon Sergeant time and more E8 time, those slots, you have to take a back seat. Your ego has to take a back seat. Mm-hmm. What right looks like, and you know what the answer is. Sometimes you have to let them figure out for themselves that your job is this. You can't just tell them, because it comes off looking pompous and you come off looking like, a know-it-all and everything else. It's like, hey, sir, when you need me, I'm here. We're going to figure this thing out together. I'm your partner in this. I'm not your adversary. You know what I mean?
Right. It's so funny that you said that you're the senior trainer. I know that you're one of Rob Robinson's NCOs when you say that, because he is passionate about that, man. So I got a chuckle out of that when you said that.
Training is the lifeblood and the job of the non-commissioned officer. I will tell you this. There's no combat leader that's effective in combat unless they've trained their troops. That I will take that to my grave. Combat is not won in combat. It's won back in the rear, training your guys.
I love it, man. I can see the intensity in your face. It just fires me up. I'm ready to, if I could fit in my uniform, I would go back and suit up and go to war with you, man. Shifting gears, Trevor. Talk to me about Trevor.
Oh, Trevor Winay. Me and my NCO James Redding. So we were E5 platoon FOs together. So we hung out together all the time. That's who I used to hang out with on the weekends. And his wife was in the military as well. And she was stationed with one of I think one of the quartermaster units on Fort Lewis, and they all deployed with us. Well, in her unit, she had a soldier that this little kid named Trevor Winay. He was like a 19-year-old kid just out of high school, joined the Army. He used to tag along with us at barbecues and stuff like that. And he was just this good soul. You know what I mean? He looked at me and James, because we were combat arms, even though we weren't infantry. People who aren't, they don't know the difference. They just think we're combat arms. And we would tell all these stories of all the training we were doing. And he thought the world of us. And he was like, man, I need to join the infantry so I could do all this stuff. And I remember, dude, and it's one of the most sobering moments. I was like, dude, you don't want to be in the infantry, because where you're at's going to be safe and sound. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. And then he ended up getting taken out by an IED. And we found out a couple days after the fact. And James, actually, he talked to his wife, and she was on the FOB across the street from us. So FOB Diamondback, FOB Merez are separated by a road. But back then you had to have a combat patrol to go across the road. So he couldn't even go see his wife. So this kid, and James took it so hard. I mean, I took it hard too, because I knew him, but he took it really, really hard. And we find out, and he's like, man, I got to go see my wife. And I was like, dude, I can't do that. You know what I mean? We can't just go. I can't just drop everything, create a patrol for us to go over to FOB Diamondback so you can see your wife. That's not fair to the guys. That's not fair to the mission. And I was trying to figure out, I was on the verge of losing this dude. Losing him, because he was going to check out mentally. He already was stop loss. So if you've ever dealt with any of the stop loss issues and how attitudes are with people who are stop loss, he had almost checked out from that. So then this issue comes on, and I was like, you know what? We don't have a patrol tomorrow. So I talked to our interpreter, Hussein, who was basically the guy that would get you anything in the world that you needed from the local economy. And I was like, dude, get me a bottle of whiskey. And I knew it was the wrong answer. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here telling you hey, you know what I mean? It was not the right answer, especially when you're now expected to be a senior non-commissioned officer as a platoon sergeant. The answer is not to drink in a combat zone, because that violates everything General Order No. 1 says. With that being said, I did what I had to do to make sure I didn't lose this soldier. We went in his container. We locked the door. We drank that bottle of whiskey. We talked about Trevor and life and everything else all night long. And, the next day we woke up feeling like crap because our heads were pounding. But at the same time, I had him for the rest of the deployment. Given what I know now, I would do the same exact thing 20 times over if it meant doing what you have to do to take care of your soldiers.
Nothing but respect for that, my man. And And I think that really touches on the importance in combat leadership of human connection, right? Of knowing your people and putting your people first. People can criticize you for, going out and getting some liquor from the economy and drinking with your troop. Fine, whatever. But the point is that James was given an opportunity to get right and get back out in the fight. And at the end of the day, that was the result of all that.
And I will tell you this. There's battles that happen down the road that if James Redding wasn't my gunner, I don't know if I'm here.
There's nothing else I can say about that. I also know that if Rob Robinson knew that you had done that, he probably would have choked your ass out. But I'll just leave that there.
100%. I have no doubt in my mind.
Talk to me about your CIB story. What is the Combat Infantryman Badge? And
all right, so
tell me about that.
So the Combat Infantryman Badge is an award that's given to combat guys who actually get in contact downrange in theater. You only get it if you come under fire. Supposedly, you only get it if you come under fire, and it's only for infantrymen and 11 series. They have another badge for the medics. That's kind of the same scenario, the combat medic badge. So I'm in an infantry battalion. I'm not an infantry guy, but I have infantry guys who are in my platoon. The mortar guys are 11 series guys. So we have this giant formation where, we had already been attacked a whole bunch of times. So everyone in the formation pretty much has earned their CIBs. Giant formation. We're standing out there. Everybody's hooing and hawing. I mean, we're a giant mortar target sitting on the fob, but that's another story. And everybody's excited. I'm sitting in there thinking, man, this is, I don't want to be here, but I'm here to support my guys. So we go through the colonel, the full board colonel, brigade commander. He pins on the battalion commanders, who pin on the company commanders, who pin on their platoon leaders, who pin on their platoon sergeants, down the line, down to the lowest man. So it's a long process. At the end of the process, the company commanders, get released from the battalion commanders, and they have the opportunity to, tell them what a great job that they did and how they're proud of them and everything else. And Rob Robinson, in a stunning moment, I'm not gonna lie, he puts us all at ease, and he's like, hey, I want Sergeant Troutman to come up here. And I come up there and I don't know what's going on. I always thought I was going to get fired at every opportunity. So I was like, here, I'm about to get fired again. So that's kind of how I was. He's like, I want you guys to know that Sergeant Troutman might be one of the best infantrymen I have ever met in my entire life. And I know he's not an 11 series guy, but I'm going to take this CIB that I just got pinned on my chest, and I'm going to give it to him. And I was stunned, to say the least. That I never thought I ever did a good job. So just some kind of recognition is great. And I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of awards that I got in the military that I probably didn't earn. They just give them to you. There's a lot of awards that I didn't get that I should have gotten. I don't care. That's the one thing that meant the most to me, even though I can never wear it on my uniform or on my chest. It meant so much to me that this guy who I looked up to so much thought so highly of me.
It's mad respect, man. That's all I can say about that. What a great moment. That's fantastic. And, speaking of leaders that I know that you have a lot of respect for, and we're going to get to back to Mosul, but I want to put some color about you as well. Talk to me about First Sergeant Swift. First off, for folks who aren't familiar, who is the first sergeant? What is the first sergeant responsible for? And tell me a little bit about Swift, because everything that I've heard from Rob, everything I've heard from you, he's a hell of a leader. And I think people need to know more about him.
All right. So the first sergeant is the company commander's senior advisor, senior trainer for the unit. He's the head enlisted guy in a company. So he's the standard bearer. He's the one who makes sure that everything functions, but he also is the one who makes sure you have chow, who makes sure you have a CASEVAC plan, to make sure that everything in the company happens behind closed doors. He's the guy advocating for you, fighting for you, but he's the guy that's going to dig in your butt if stuff goes wrong. First Sergeant Swift, I mean, was insane. He was crazy, but in a good way. Don't get me wrong. The dude was nuts. And that's exactly what we needed. Like, this dude, he'd already been to combat. I mean, there's so many stories. You don't even know what the truth is. I have no idea what the actual truth is behind his deployments because he never talked about him. It was everybody else who talked about him. But this dude had already been to combat multiple times. He was one of the few people in our formation who'd actually been to combat before. So he just knew everything. There's nothing this dude didn't know. He would show up in the middle of a battle, like right beside you, and you're like, where did you come from, First Sergeant? He's like, it doesn't matter. Just pretend I'm not here. I'm one of your guys. Where do you need me? You know, like, what the heck? Like there, we were out walking all day, taking these civil affairs guys out, right? And that's a story for another time. That was super fun. We come back and
it's gonna be. It's in the book. It's jaw dropping.
It's insane. We come back after this like 9-hour walk, and we're stuck at the traffic circle right above Fob Marez, just to the north, like 100 yards from getting into Fob. At the end of this long day, the middle of the summer, it's hot. A suspected IED, right? So they had tasked me with a squad of infantry that day with my platoon to help me with security. So I get down with the squad leader, Sergeant Castro, on the ground. We're walking around trying to develop a situation on the ground, and out of nowhere Swifty pops up, right? And he looks at me and he's like, "What's going on, Troutman?" And I was like, they say it's an IED. And he like pops his head and he's like, "Huh, have you tried shooting at it?" And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" He's like, "It might work. You never know." And then he just walks off like he was never there. And like, he was the master of everything. Master breacher, I mean, every weapon system in the world, he could tell you how it functioned. Like when we were in Kuwait, the day before we went across the wire, he brought over a flat rack full of ammo. And if you don't know what a flat rack is, it's a semi-trailer that's empty in the back that you would load up like a whole entire 18-wheeler worth of stuff, full of ammunition, everything you could ever need for war. And he was like, it's the only time in my military career I was ever issued ammo, and I never had to sign for anything. So he's like, the only thing I ask is that I don't want to have to take anything back to the AHA, so just make it all disappear. So there was no accountability. There was no signing for stuff. There was just grab what you need and go. I mean, I had boxes of C4 and det cord. I didn't even know how to use that stuff. But Swifty was the guy that every time something happened, he was there to give you advice. Now, he wasn't the guy that was going to dig in your butt. Like you see the movies, and the first sergeant's the guy who's yelling and screaming at you. No, he's the guy that pulled you off to the side, and he's like, this is what I need you to do better so we don't die. Like, this is how you set your breach charge so you don't blow the whole entire town up and kill your guys when the door flies back at you. This is how I want you to do it. But he was also the calming influence, because there's a lot of stuff that happened downrange that people will never understand about how, I mean, we had this reputation as being different than everybody else. And some of it was warranted and some of it was not warranted. And he was that calming influence that was like, you know what? Just keep doing what you need to do. Me and the commander got you. You know, what are they going to do? Court-martial me? I'm Swifty. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's you got me thinking now about something that I think about all the time. I think Hollywood, pop culture, the way that they describe non-commissioned officers, I think is extremely demeaning. And what do I mean by that? Always getting in soldiers' ass, you know, chewing people out, you know, being kind of the heavies of any organization. That's not true. The good ones aren't like that. The good ones are kind of like, in my experience, the way you're describing Swifty. There's a time and place for everything, but at the end of the day, you're there to train, you're there to teach, and you're there to be supportive. Do you, as an NCO, do you kind of feel the same way, that people just don't understand what it's all about?
So I would say this: when I first joined the Army, and this how old I am, I was in the Army for 6 years before war kicked off. A lot of the NCOs back when I was there, they were that way. Mm-hmm. It kind of manifested itself because of necessity in war and everything else into the NCO Corps got got better over time at not doing that. You know what I mean? It's hard to dig in a soldier's butt when you're downrange getting shot at. You know what I mean? Like, it loses its luster at that point because you're all trying to just survive. So you figure it out, and then that's what it goes. But the thing that made Swifty different was that you just knew that this dude generally cared about your well-being. I mean, even to the point above his own. You know what I mean? Like, he cared about you, and he would do anything in the world for you. And that's how Rob was too. And that commander and first sergeant, when you have guys like that, you'll do anything in the world, knock down walls, go into gunfights. You know what I mean? You'll do anything in the world for those guys.
That's real love, man. You mentioned mortars, and I want to, for our folks who have the fortune of not being in a mortar attack, can you talk to me a little bit about, for those folks, can you talk to them a little bit, what's that like?
All right. So as a fire support guy, my job is to call in indirect fire. You know, I worked with mortars and stuff my whole entire life. A lot of people don't get that wake up call until you're downrange. Now, the enemy started to shift tactics a little bit when we got there because we were so good on the ground that they couldn't attack us. So they started lobbing mortar rounds into the fob, 5 to 10 rounds at a time. Now, these are like, I would say probably the size of a baseball, the ones that they were using. They were like 57 millimeter mortars, old, like Iraqi army stuff that they had. It's not, everything's dangerous, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not super dangerous unless it directly hits. But what it does is when you hear the screeching and they go boom really loud, it scares the crap out of you. You know what I mean? And it messes with your psyche. And I swear to God, they would hit so close to where we were living. We had craters all around us. I mean, we set up the combat volleyball, and 50% of the Purple Hearts that we got in our company were from mortar fire, from shrapnel from mortars. I mean, sitting on the fob, I mean, your Hollywood moment, having your Top Gun moment, and you get hit with shrapnel from a mortar round, and that's your cool guy story for the war.
It really is dangerous. I mean, you think about like a forward operating base, particularly, later in the campaign, dining facilities, chow halls, whatever you want to call them. I mean, usually during rush hour, you'll have like 50, 60 plus folks in there eating. A direct hit from a 107 millimeter, rocket can do some serious damage, right? Having a formation, going to the gym. I mean, it does have the potential to do some real damage if they get lucky.
100%. And that's all it takes is one round. But that's why, like the only thing that most of the guys feared was that coming in on the fob. You know what I mean? Like, we go out and get into a gunfight. No one's really worried about getting in a gunfight. We're worried about getting hit coming from the shower by the random mad mortar guy who gets a lucky shot and hits outside the shower. Like, that was what the people, like, that was the thing that you were like, man, this is what's going to take me out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
because you can't control it.
That's right. And it also, my understanding from reading your book and talking to Rob and a little personal experience on top of it, it chews up a lot of assets that you need to go out there and support your troops while they're out in sector getting in gunfights, right? ISR, helicopters, patrols. You're putting resources against that problem.
Well, it changed the dynamic of our patrol schedule. That's how bad that it got. We actually had to go out and do a counter mortar patrol, which was basically go sit on top of a hilltop, wait for this dude to fire and try to take him out. And it got so bad that my platoon actually got pulled out of the rotational sector because the brigade fob got hit, and we had to go on top of a hotel and sit up there to protect them. And they never shot one mortar round while we were up on top of that hotel, but the day we left, they got pounded.
Wow. Interesting. Okay, so now we're going to get to probably the pivotal event in the history of Blackhawk Company. And this is going to be a real easy prompt for me, and you're going to be the guy that does all the work. Talk to me about August the 4th.
All right, so we're going to set up a little dynamic for August the 4th so you understand exactly kind of how things went down on the ground. Before the transfer of authority, we had the Battle of June 24th. That was the last push. We were supposed to transfer authority. The insurgency, and Zarqawi in particular had this giant citywide attack, not on American forces, but it was on the ISF forces and the police in town as an intimidation factor to prove that they weren't ready to go. We ended up going out in that city. We got into a gunfight. The details are there. It was a pretty good gunfight, but we ended up shooting a minaret that was next to the mosque. We didn't shoot the mosque. We actually never set foot inside the mosque, but Zarqawi used that as propaganda to fuel this whole, the Americans on the western side of Mosul are out of control. They don't care about us. We need to rally against them.
Joe, so I apologize for interrupting. I just want to make sure it's real clear to the folks at home. The reason that your guy shot the minaret is because you were taking fire from someone inside the minaret.
They had a Dishka machine gun set up in the minaret.
Right. So I just want to make sure they understood that you guys weren't going out like shooting at, religious sites. They were, they were trying to kill you, and they were set up there.
We went out to take back this police station that I got overrun, and they had a machine gun set up in the minaret, like 25 feet above in the air, shooting down on top of the strikers. So we actually used proper escalation of force, shot at it with small arms fire, tried to shoot at it, with the machine guns, and then used a tow bunker buster. Showed a lot of restraint because we could have blown it up with an airstrike, but we used the tows instead. But like I said, they used that as propaganda because they were able to say, look what these Americans are doing. They don't care about our sacred sites. And then we transfer of authority, and the whole dynamic was supposed to shift on the ground. The Americans were supposed to pull back. There's an election year going on. So we weren't even supposed to be out in the city. We weren't supposed to be doing operations. It was supposed to be the Iraqis leading the Iraqis with us in tow, advising and assisting. So what they did is Zarqawi brought his people over, and this was the first time we really saw a lot of foreign fighters. They trained for a month straight in Tal Afar with all of the foreign fighter AQI guys mixed in with some extremist guys, mixed in with just regular Iraqis who didn't have jobs and hated Americans. And we had this reputation as being an invincible force. We were the ghost soldiers on the western half of Mosul. They planned a battle specifically to attack us, the western half of Mosul. They got the police commander to close all 5 bridges so no traffic would go over the bridges, and they were going to come to western Mosul to finally, once and for all, prove that the striker soldiers were not invincible. They had brought film crews. They were going to shoot propaganda videos. They were going to tell the world that they could kill the striker soldiers. And that's where we happened. They were going to set a trap, attack a small American convoy, because they knew the difference between us and them, and draw us out into the city for this giant citywide battle where they were going to pin us down and kill us. They had strategically placed weapons. They had machine gun teams in place. They had communications, sophisticated communications. And this was the first time that we ever saw large-scale coordinated effort between multiple cells and multiple guys. And the reporting said we were never in the city that day. So this is how it kind of unfolded.
Joe, before you pivot, I apologize. I want to make sure that our listeners understand something here. What you just described was a very detailed, a lot of planning by foreign fighters, by members of the AQI network, right? And they were enabled by folks within the Iraq security forces that you were partnering with at the time. Like, I'm not saying that all the ISF guys are bad and corrupt. I'm not saying that. But as you report it, there were members of that within that organization that were actually collaborating with AQI to make sure that you guys were basically isolated, cut off from help and support. That's what you guys were up against that day. And you woke up that morning not knowing that this was going on. This was not something that you guys were expecting when you went out the door that day, right? Did I capture that correctly?
100%. And it was actually the police chief of Mosul who was the corrupt individual who was coordinated with Zarqawi himself.
Wow. I'm sorry. Please continue.
So my platoon had the counter mortar patrol for the morning time. Yay, us. It was hot. I mean, August, if you've never been if you've never been to Iraq in August, I don't think you've ever experienced real heat. It was hot that day. We roll up and we're set up on the counter mortar patrol, which was on the northern side of the city. And we're up there. We were supposed to be up there from 9 to 12. We started hearing stuff pop up. Like the guys, the AQI guys started going from neighborhood to neighborhood, just causing trouble to get us out there. They were shooting storekeepers. They were blowing up cars. They were attacking any of the police people that were in uniform on the way to work, laying in IEDs. I mean, we didn't know any of this was going on. And then all of this intel started coming into the brigade intel shop. They called down to our company and were like, hey, who do you have out right now? And they're like, hey, we have our 5th platoon that's out on counter mortar. And, I think that they had made a command decision that we didn't have the combat power to combat some of that stuff, which I only had 14 guys that day. My platoon was down to 14 guys. So there's no way we had the combat power to combat that. They were going to replace us with the MGS guys. They called us back. So we're rolling back down Highway 1 as fast as we could get back to the FOB before everything even kicked off. And the S2, the Battalion S2 called me directly, which never, ever happens, right? And he's like, hey, we got some reports of bad guys doing bad things in the middle of the Yarmouth traffic circle about to attack American forces. What's your current location? I look around and I was like, I'm in the middle of the Yarmouth traffic circle. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, get back safely. So we saw these dudes, and I think that there's a couple of things that happened that saved us. One, it was right at midday prayer. So I think that some of those dudes were off praying for, success in the mission, so they weren't all ready to attack. They had put some cars in front and tried to block Highway 1, and my driver was like, what do I do? And I was like, just hit the gas. And we drove over top of some cars, I'm not going to lie, and got back to the FOB as fast as we could. So we get back, and right after we had come through, down south, about a mile away, a National Guard convoy had come through, and that was where they had planted their ambush, and they hit these HET trucks, which are the trucks that you put the tanks and the Bradleys on to drive them around the country, because it's more cost effective to do it that way than have tanks and Bradleys drive. So they blew the tires off 2 vehicles, got into a little gunfight, and then those dudes picked up shop, had their injuries, licked their wounds, came back to FOB Berez, and they called Blackhawk Company because it was our sector, and they basically were like, you need to go out and find out what's going on. So at that time, stuff started happening in the north. MGS platoon was pulled off the counter mortar patrol to kind of do an area reconnaissance of the northern sector, and they got into contact. So 1st platoon was sent out, A, to check on the HETs to see what could be done, and B, to follow on and go reinforce MGS, who was in heavy sustained contact at that point from multiple individuals, RPGs, machine gun fire from the Pepsi plant that was in the north right by one of our police stations. En route, they hit one of the most complex, nasty ambushes you're ever going to see in the history of life. I think their lead vehicle hit 10 IEDs within a 2-minute period. They were attacked from elevated positions with machine gun fires. They had RPGs that were flying from the ground level and from the building level. Like, there's no movie in the world that does justice to what we saw that day. No movie. They roll through the ambush. They are licking their wounds, trying to make it to MGS. We sent out 2nd platoon to go reinforce them. They hit an ambush going out there that was even more intense. Disabled vehicles, almost had people get killed. Like, we have 2 platoons in a heavy gunfight in ambush locations, another platoon in a heavy gunfight, and they still are like, hey, we need to get you guys. Battalion was like, we need you guys to go out to this HET site and secure this HET site because we got 2 American vehicles that are burning on fire now. So me and my platoon went out with Captain Rob to the HET site. My job was to secure the HET site. And, oh, yeah, by the way, this was the ambush location that they were setting up the giant attack on American forces for. So we got into one of the nastiest gunfights you're ever going to know. It was so bad. Like, I couldn't even see the road from all of the fire that was going around me. My vehicle had so many bullet holes in it. And they brought immediately after we came in contact, 3rd Platoon, who was the battalion QRF and was only supposed to be used in emergencies, comes out to reinforce my location into the north. They get into, I mean, they probably saved my life because they took all the fire once they got there and they stopped shooting at me. And this battle's just raging on. And it's hard to describe the veracity of and the volume of fire that we faced. And it just went on and it went on and it went on. And what had happened was the enemy was taking heavy losses. They got in communication with each other and they were like, you know what? This battle is going to take place where these burning vehicles are. So everybody stop attacking all of the Americans and come down to where these vehicles are on fire. And which happened to be my location, which was super fun. So the battle shifted. Everything started to shift. And Rob, you know, through incredible intuition, through training, whatever you want to call it, he made the call to shift all the forces back to where we were and bring these guys back down to get more guns in the fight. Because, I mean, I don't know how people in 3rd Platoon are still even here. Like, literally, they were 50 yards away from me, and I couldn't even see their vehicles from the dust clouds from the bullets and the RPG strikes. It was so intense. So all of the forces come down to this one central location, and we just basically battle it out. The entire battle goes on for, I would say, 10 straight hours, like a 10-hour gunfight. If you look at the history of everything else in the Army and everything you know about, this was the largest company-sized firefight of the entire war in Iraq. It's the largest company-sized engagement that anybody's seen in the military since Blackhawk Down. And no one ever even knew we were in the city. When we got back and the mission was done and everybody was safe, you know what I mean, and we recovered the Hets, the next day the news reported that no American forces were in the city, that 7 to 10 insurgents had attacked Iraqi police. I'm going to tell you, there was between 100 to 300 individuals on the ground that were trying to attack us.
So thank you for that, Joe. It's very good. And just for the listeners, the book, so detailed, and it's broken down from like the moment that they roll out the gate for their patrol. I think the chronology picks up like at 6 a.m, something like that. When did the final member of Blackhawk Company make it back to the FOB that night? What time?
Around 2300.
Around 11 p.m. local. Okay. So that gives everyone kind of an idea from just how long that action was. And it's not just about the length, as Joe described, it was the intensity, right? So when you go out the gate in the morning, you have a basic load of ammunition and water for a 6-hour patrol, right? So during this time where the company is at all parts of West Mosul and you're encountering this contact, this attack, it's not contact. You're encountering this attack over such a large area. You have to immediately be concerned about casualty evacuation. You have to be concerned about resupplying ammo. I mean, I can only imagine just how difficult of a tactical problem that was to solve. Reconstitute the force so you can continue fighting and not get overwhelmed.
There's a couple other factors as well. We had no air support that day in the city. Like, we had some Kiowas that checked on station towards the end of the battle, but they didn't really shoot anything. They were observation only. So we did that whole entire battle with zero support, air support. So logistically speaking, I'm going to tell you that when you're in a sustained gunfight, your depletion of ammo happens fast. That was absolutely a concern. Water goes fast when it's hot outside and you're fighting. We were running out of water. We were running out of fuel for the vehicles. I mean, vehicles only run so long. So we had contacted Battalion and we're like, hey, can you send us a combat logistics patrol out so we can get fuel and ammo? And I'm going to tell you, man to man, those dudes wouldn't come out. Even the recovery assets, we got a call about, hey, we just got outside the gate and the 88 recovery assets broke down, so we can't make it into your combat zone. And we're not coming out until the area is secure. Bro, we're in the middle of a gunfight. It's not going to be secure for a while. Like, our company, like one of the lieutenants who was the S4 used to be in our company, and he came out on an LMTV from Blackhawk Company to bring extra ammo and fuel and everything else in the middle of this battle.
It's Joe, I have to ask the question. Why do you think that the word didn't get out into the media about this big engagement?
I 100% have no doubt it had to do with the fact that we weren't supposed to. I mean, the narrative back home was that we had transferred authority. We were done doing major combat operations. The Iraqis were going to stand up for themselves. We know 100% that that wasn't true, but that was the narrative they were pushing. You got to understand, this is an election year. Bush was trying to get reelected. He was running saying, hey, we're done. We're done doing what we're doing. We're not going to do anything else. We gave the country back to him. They couldn't go and say, hey, we got in this ginormous gunfight in the middle of downtown Mosul for, 11 hours, and we killed 300 people who were trying to attack us. You know what I mean? Yeah. I have no doubt that played into a major role in that.
It's really interesting, too, because at the time, again, we're dating ourselves. Facebook was just starting to become a thing, right? 2004, I believe. Maybe it was even pre-Facebook. I don't know. But like social media certainly wasn't as prominent at that point. GoPro cameras, guys like going out with GoPros mounted wasn't as big of a thing. I mean, in some respects, it is easier. I don't want to come across like I'm being accusatory or promoting conspiracy theories, but it's almost easier back in those days to push a narrative despite what happens on the ground. Like today, it would be almost impossible.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. Why the hets? There seemed to be in your book, there was like so much emphasis upon getting out to those hets and recovering them. There were no soldiers in them. The soldiers had already been evacuated. They were burning in the middle of the street. I heard Rob's answer, but I want to hear yours. Why do you think there was so much command emphasis upon getting there and getting that stuff recovered?
Dude, I mean, I don't even know. And Rob actually asked the question in the middle of the gunfight, like, why are we even out here? There's no strategic value for sitting out here and guarding these things. They're going to burn to the ground. Let them burn to the ground. Like, why are we here? I never really understood what the answer was, but at my level, I don't question. I just do. You know what I mean?
Sure.
My job is not to question what the mission is. My job is to execute the mission to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
And when you're in the middle of a gunfight, you really care about just making sure you die.
Yep. No, I get that. Let's talk about Iraq security forces, because you mentioned the transition of authority. And just for the folks who don't know about it, there was, as Joe very, very effectively described, politically, there was going to be this transfer of authority from the United States and the coalition to the Iraqis for their security, right? They were going to be the ones who did these, that were going to be responsible for that. Let's just go ahead and just take it straight on, man. Like, what were you guys thinking when you were hearing this stuff, knowing what you knew about the ISF at the time?
There's no way. There's no way. I mean, there was so much corruption. I mean, I can't speak for the rest of Iraq, but in Mosul, there was so much corruption. The money that we were funneling, and we were funneling massive amounts of money to try to stand up these forces, to get them uniforms, to get them weapons, to get them training, to get them paid. It wasn't going to the guys on the ground. People were stealing it. Everyone had their hand in the pocket. There was so much corruption in the government back then that dudes were coming out on patrols without even having shoes on. They'd come out with weapons with no ammunition. Nobody had uniforms. And there was stuff we would drop off: radios, ammunition, and weapons. Don't know what happened to them. Have no idea. And then when there was any kind of crosstalk between the Iraqi National Guard and the local city, Iraqi police, there was always a standoff between those two because, I mean, God help them, the Iraqi National Guard was actually trying. Those dudes were trying. It's just that you don't know who's in charge. There's no command structure between the two. everyone says, I'm not doing what you're doing. We don't have to listen to you. We're the guys that are running this. We own this battle space. There's no coordination. There's no command structure. I mean, it was a mess of epic proportions. And that would have been a mess even if they were trained. Throw in the fact that these dudes wouldn't leave the wire to go on patrol, so training them was next to impossible. There's the guys who were on the ground and we knew every day because we went out in sector. There's no way those dudes were gonna stand up and be ready to go.
Yeah, and this is important, and I think for our listeners, one of the things that we want to do with this project is we want to make sure that we describe things as they were at that time. And at that time, you got to remember that the Iraqi security forces or the Iraqi army was disbanded, right? Less than a year before that, right? And then we try to reconstitute a new force while we were fighting a counterinsurgency. I mean, in defense of the Iraq security force guys, it was mission impossible, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
It was mission impossible. Fast forward, the Iraq security forces at great sacrifice liberated the city of Mosul from ISIS at enormous sacrifice and tremendous bravery. So don't take this exchange to be like us slagging off the ISF. That's not what we're doing. We're telling the story as it was during that time. The ISF being thrown into the lead role, I think that was a overwhelmingly political thing and not a military thing. Am I being fair there?
100%. 100%. Because, I mean, and it was almost overnight too. Like the transition was, even though we knew they weren't ready, in July after the transfer of authority, there was more like, hey, take a step back from go on your patrols, but also take these guys out and let them take the lead. Even though we knew they weren't ready to take the lead, we still had to put that facade on, you know what I mean? Because we did a couple of giant, like, citywide operations to show the people of Mosul that these guys were ready to go. But, yeah, they were not ready to go.
And did you see them grow during that process? Like when you guys were kind of like in the back of the stack, kind of pushing them and advising them, did you see them get better? Or is it just like mission impossible?
Where we saw them get better was when we trained with them on the FOB. You could see the Iraqi National Guard guys take to heed what we were trying to teach them, and they understood. The Iraqi police, because they trying to get them to go out on patrol, they didn't have a real roster. And, I mean, there's an intimidation factor going on, too. Like, a lot of people don't understand this. Guys who signed up to join the police force, dude, they started capping their family members and hunting them down because they called them traitors to Iraq. So there was that fear factor as well. So you would train a guy one day and he might not be there the next time you go out. So it's hard to get better if the force change. I mean, think about if every time you went on a mission, you had a new set of guys. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how good you are. Those guys aren't going to be effective.
I really feel for the guys that served in the ISF. I do. The guys that were good guys and want to go out and defend their country. The casualties they took, the threats that their families faced, and then having to, work with an army that was basically occupying your country at the same time. I put myself in the position of those guys all the time, and it was a lot to ask. It was a lot to ask. I want to talk to you a little bit about civilians in West Mosul. You and your guys spent a lot of time out there interacting with the civilian population. What was it like for a civilian who lived, just a normal everyday civilian who lived in West Mosul? What was life like for them?
So once again, it's divided into sections. So pre-April, when everything started going crazy, Mosul, it had started to come back around, like January, February timeframe. Things were kind of calm. My platoon's mission during that time was actually to rebuild schools. So we were the face of building these schools and bringing supplies and all of this stuff from the States. And we used to get down and play soccer with the kids. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't bad. It started to get worse. Now, the attacks and the violence, like I said at the beginning, wasn't against us. It was against the people of Mosul because they have such a diverse population. I mean, you have the highest sector of Christian population located in Iraq, other than Kurdistan, is in Mosul. There's more churches, there's more everything. And they took that as, we don't want a melting pot and we don't want all of these people melting together. We want an Iraq for Iraq. I mean, it's kind of like the Taliban, the hardline Taliban philosophy. And that's what they tried to force onto them by not attacking us, attacking them. So the violence and all the stuff that we started to see and escalate would be against the people of Mosul. And you would see shops close, and you would see, I mean, you could see the after effects of what would happen in the battles and blood trails and other stuff that was going on. Even though you wouldn't witness it with your eyes, you could see it after it happened. And that went on until they started attacking the Americans. And then, I mean, life must have been bad in the middle of downtown Mosul when we're getting in the giant gunfights. I mean, we demolished the structures. We, force protection is force protection. We're going to do what we have to do. If you're getting shot at, we're going to return fire. It's not because we are trying to harm the people. It's because we're trying to stay alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it definitely speaks to the huge challenge that you and your troops faced, because on one hand, you guys are smart enough to see the big picture. Like, we can't fight our way out of this thing. Like, the people have to, they have to rebuild their community, right? They have to get civil society going. We have to get schools going and sewage and all that kind of stuff. But that's not that none of that stuff is happening in peacetime. That stuff is happening in a combat zone. And so it almost creates like this, I don't want to use the word impossible, but it's so, that kind of having to deal with that makes it so difficult to be able to earn the trust of the population.
And one of the frustrating things for me, you know what I mean? I'm a big picture kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted us out of their country. That all of the stuff that happened down south was because we were an occupying force. They wanted us to go home. In hindsight, if they would have just stopped attacking and let us rebuild, we would have gone home.
Yeah.
It's just a frustrating piece because you know what the answer is, but you can't force it on somebody. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, I understand. When you were working with the headmasters and when you were working with, like, I'm assuming you also work with medical clinics as well, that you had interactions with, what were those folks like? I mean, they clearly wanted to be able to rebuild, or am I wrong?
No, 100%. They were great. Mm-hmm. Everyone was happy to see us. Everyone, we never got shot at one time when we were out of school. I can tell you that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even in the community, people were waving at us. They were happy because we were providing something to them that they didn't have. It was some shred of normal life that they wanted to get back to. You know what I mean? Because Mosul was a modern city in Iraq times. You know what I mean? They were used to having an education system. They were used to having electricity and water and food and structure and everything else. And they had a lot of money from the oil that was coming into the West. So this isn't a city that was like a third world country that you think of when you think of Iraq. These people, I mean, the structures, some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen from a structural standpoint were in Mosul. They had great architecture. They had great design. The road system was amazing. Like, these people were used to normal life and wanted to get back to it. So anything you could do to provide that for them on the road back to normalcy was, they loved you for it.
I want to fast forward about, I don't know, 15 years. I don't know. I'm not good at math. A few years. You and your soldiers are sitting at home. Most of you, some of you were still in, and you saw the results. You saw what happened to Mosul because ISIS took it over. And then the subsequent liberation of the city and the military action that took on was very destructive. You probably saw a lot of the spaces that you and your guys traversed. Can you describe how that made you feel when you saw all that?
Well, people have to understand this too. I went back to Mosul for my second tour during the surge and was on Fob Merez for 15 more months. So I actually spent 23 months of my life on FOB Merez operating in and around Mosul. So to see what had happened and know, I mean, just the destruction of the people that were in Mosul. I mean, the mass genocide that happened after they took over. I mean, it was heartbreaking. I'm not going to lie. I don't care how you feel. And I know a lot of people are like, man, I don't care about that. Dude, you can't not go through some of the things that we went through and not feel for those people and feel for just like, it's almost like everything we had done up to that point didn't matter. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean,
it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. And I think a lot of Afghanistan veterans probably look at what happened during the withdrawal and they ask the questions about like what, all the work and all the sacrifice. I suspect that you guys probably felt the same way when you saw what happened to Mosul. Many of the people that you probably encountered during your operations, worked with, are probably dead.
Oh, I have no doubt.
It's a very sad story, man. And it's I just wanted to make sure we went off script there. I wanted to ask you that because
it's a valid question because, I mean, think about it. I spent 2 years of my life trying to make that place a better place. How could you not witness what went down and think, man, what was it all for? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Fair one. I want to talk to you a little bit about injuries sustained during the deployment. Rob and I talked a little bit about the evolution of medical care when you lost your teammates in outside of Samara, and what the standards of care were there. Because again, this was happened in 2003, right?
Yeah.
Medical care has come so far. It's unbelievable when you go out and see units and type of medical care they can deliver now. How many Purple Hearts did you guys have in the company by the end of the campaign? Rough estimate.
We had 39 Purple Hearts total for the whole year.
39 Purple Hearts for a company of about 150, 170 guys, right?
Yes.
A fifth of the company earned Purple Hearts.
Yes.
What were the most common injuries?
Mortar rounds from the FOB.
Interesting.
About half the Purple Hearts were from indirect fire on the FOB.
Yeah. And so when a soldier is injured, and of course I know there are a lot of variables here, where it lands in relation to the soldier and so forth, but we're talking about fragmentary injuries, right? Mostly to the extremities. By that point, were you guys carrying around the tourniquets? Or is that something that hadn't hit the streets yet?
No, but by the time the indirect fire really started flying, we had tourniquets in our med kits. I mean, you pretty much carried your med kit with you wherever you went to. Mm-hmm. Just because, I mean, when that stuff started going down, everyone had a med kit or you had a medic with you. A lot of times, like Rob kind of made us all go to chow together and stay together a lot because when mortar rounds start flying and there's no radios, if someone does get hurt, you don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where they're at, and that's a combat multiplier to have multiple people there to be able to save your life. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So as annoying as it was sometimes to not get a break from my guys, at least I knew where they all were. And if something happened to them, bam,
yep.
We were good to go. Now, I was lucky. I think I was the only platoon out of our whole entire company who had 0 Purple Hearts.
Especially after everything you went through on August the 4th.
Dude, it's a miracle that none of our guys got hit on August the 4th. Wow. 0 Purple Hearts in my platoon for the entire year.
Amazing. But you and your guys obviously are well familiar with the improvised explosive device, the IED. Can you talk to the folks who've never experienced what it's like to be hit by an IED?
Now I will tell you this. There's varying degrees of IEDs. There's some of them that we saw that were like like diesel gasoline, like just blow up and light on fire. There's some small ones. There's some that didn't go off, some that missed. I mean, the majority of the things that hit us either missed or didn't hit us straight on, or they weren't there. Like I never got like the major blow up your vehicle and flip it over IEDs. And like I said, I had 0 Purple Hearts in my entire company. We hit some, but that was more like the threat of the IED was more terrifying than the actual IED was. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Gunners, TCs, guys sticking out of the hatches. Like, my head was on a swivel. I didn't care about getting in a gunfight. I knew I was good in a gunfight. If I get down on the ground, I'm going to execute. I'm worried about getting taken out while I'm standing out the hatch. You know what I mean? So that psychological effect of the IED itself, especially like before we rolled into Iraq and we drove our strikers from Kuwait all the way up to Mosul, basically by the time it was done, we've seen 10,000 videos of vehicles blowing up. That's all they ingrained into us was that you're going to blow up, you're going to hit an IED, you're going to blow up, you're going to hit an IED. So like that psych factor of, oh my God, you're looking everywhere. It was, I don't know, man. I don't even know how to describe it.
It really is a psychological weapon in so many different ways. And also I think for people who, for people back who are listening, again, during this time, we didn't have all the countermeasures, right? Like the jammers and that sort of stuff, right? Like back in this time, it was, you had your protection on the vehicle and you had your eyeballs. There was no later in the campaign, these vehicles had so many antennas and compute boxes on them to disrupt
the Duke systems.
Yeah. Like you didn't have that stuff back then, right?
Let me tell you something funny, okay? I'm a vertically challenged individual. I am 5'3". When they put the armor plate on my 50 cal, it added 2 inches. In order for me to see over the 50 cal, I had to stand on an MRE box with my whole entire body outside of the striker to see to fire the weapon. We didn't have an RWS in my striker, so you had to free gun the 50 cal. So my entire body, when I'm rolling around out in sector, is outside of the vehicle. So my number one concern was an IED striking and taking my legs out.
Right. Yeah, it was a tough obstacle for everyone who was out in sector working, whether you were a combat arms guy, whether you were a special operations force soldier, whether you were a logistician, moving along the MSRs. That was the threat. It was such a dangerous thing. I want to pivot really quickly, shift gears a little bit. We're going to start talking about R&R. Can you talk to our listeners about the program? What is R&R?
So R&R is when you're supposed to get a break from combat. You know what I mean? They say that, hey, if you get out of combat and you get a little rest and relaxation, you come back ready to fight. And you're supposed to be able to have this bit of downtime. I mean, if you think about like Vietnam and the guys would go, you see all the movies, they go to like Saigon and they get a little rest and relaxation and that's their little break and they go back. That's the idea behind the R&R program.
Yeah. And so can you describe, so when did you take your R&R during Blackhawk Company's tour? Was it before August 4th or was it after? When did you take yours?
3 days after the Battle of August 4th is when I went on R&R.
Oh, man. What was it like going back to the States after you've gone through that?
It wasn't just going back to the States. Like, we had just been in this major battle that nobody even knew we were in. So you really couldn't even talk about it because no one would believe you. Now, luckily, I went back. There was like a whole bunch of guys from Blackhawk Company. I would say maybe like a squad level that we all went back at the same time. So we traveled all together. We didn't talk. We didn't say anything. You know what I mean? There's nothing to be said. You're just trying to like decompress. I didn't even want to go because I felt like I was leaving my guys behind. You know what I mean? So I had to fight tooth and nail. They brought Sergeant Wallmeyer back to be the platoon sergeant while I went. And so you fly, we went to the Mosul airport, you catch the flight that's going down to Kuwait and like you meet up there with a bunch of guys who are from your own brigade. They know you're in Blackhawk Company. They know you were in a gunfight, but nobody knows the specifics of it. So you don't talk about it. You know what I mean? They're talking about all the great things that they're doing. And in my mind, I'm just like, I don't even care. Like, there's nothing you guys have done. No offense to you guys. There's nothing you guys have done that compares to what I just went through a couple days ago. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And then you fly down into Kuwait and you get all the people from all of Iraq that are going on R&R. They're coming back. They're going. And they just talk mad junk about all the things that they've done. And everybody's a war hero. And everybody's been in giant battles. And everybody's survived. They're the last member of their platoon or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And at that point, I just wanted to be away from everything that wasn't the guys from Blackhawk Company. So we all got together. We got our little thing. And we didn't even say anything. We didn't even talk. You know what I mean? There's nothing that needed to be said. If you were in the company and you were in that firefight, you know what I mean? Yeah. Nobody was exempt from not being under those conditions. So then I flew home, and I never really felt back. I never really felt this calming sense. Like, I worried about my guys. I worried about that. I tried to have conversations. You try to have a conversation with a normal person, and they can't understand because you can't tell them about the giant battle you were in because it didn't happen because the news never reported it. You know what I mean? You can't tell them that we're still getting in gunfights because the news is reporting that everything's safe and everything's good. And they can't understand, even other military members that didn't deploy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They couldn't understand the things that you're going through because you can't understand that stuff unless you experience it for yourself. So conversations were hard, and time was like so slow. And you got to remember, like, I was having hearing loss from the battle because I fired so many rounds out of my weapon that I couldn't hear anything. So I couldn't sleep. The food didn't taste good. Like, I would get sick to my stomach. Like, I would get headaches. Like, all I could think about, like, I was going to miss movement and not get back. So I had a calendar, and I'd set alarms, and I'd check my thing, and every single day I'd check and recheck, and I tried to call up and see if I could go back early. Like, it was not normal. Like, it was not normal.
So switching off wasn't a thing.
No,
and
there's no switching off.
And for how long was R&R? It was 2 weeks, right?
It was 2 weeks. 2 weeks of just brutality. Like,
yeah.
It was brutal.
Did you watch the news while you were there? Did you follow what was going on in Iraq?
I didn't because I take that back. The first night I was back, I did. And I got so mad because it wasn't an accurate portrayal of what was going on that I just lost faith in the news itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when it came time to load in the plane and go back, how did you feel?
I actually felt relieved. Like, I felt the closer that I got back to Mosul, like going back to Kuwait, you feel a little bit better. Going back to the Mosul airport, you feel a little bit better. And then when you get back with your guys, you know, it's such a surreal feeling because you're only gone for 2 weeks, but it feels like you missed out on everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You hear the stories of battles, and you hear the stories of things that have gone on, and you feel like you missed the whole entire war, even though you're only gone for 2 weeks.
Yeah. So you guys finish out your tour, and now it's time to go home. When you got back home, what did you guys feel? Mission accomplished.
I mean,
you probably celebrated together, but like, what was that reintegration process like?
I mean, at first it's great because you're home, and you got to remember though too, like, we never thought we were going to go back and back and back and back and back. That wasn't a thing back then. You know what I mean? It was like, hey, we went for our 180 days, and it was supposed to be almost done. And so for us, we did have a sense of accomplishment. We all knew that we did good things. You know what I mean? So for us, we felt good. And then the longer you're back, the more that stuff from R&R kind of sets in as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to go back. I mean, when you first come back and you're still around the company, that first block leave period is just like R&R. Like, you feel isolated. You feel like no one knows what you're going through. You can't really tell people because, I mean, if you tell people all the things that you did when you were there, they're going to look at you like you're some kind of a war criminal. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something you brag about. I mean, I make the comment about going to a job interview, you know what I mean? And like, what marketable skills you have? I shot people in the face. You know what I mean? That's not a marketable skill. You can't really tell the civilian population that, hey, you know what I mean? This is my primary function in life is to shoot people, you know?
Yeah.
And we were the best, probably one of the best companies of the war so far. So, everyone's like, did you ever shoot anybody? Do the math on that one. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you
do the math?
Yeah, no doubt. And did you guys, what was it? So you get back from block leave and you start like training, right? Did you guys know that you were heading back? You mentioned that it wasn't a thing back then, but did you guys have an inkling based upon the way things were going that you were going to be back on the deployment cycle within the year?
So kind of what happened was this. Everybody who had got promoted during the year, which was a massive amount of people, especially like the senior level and everything else, all of us went to NCOESs and officer courses and train up courses. Like, we didn't have an opportunity for 18 months to go to any of those schools, so everybody got to go to school. And when we came back from that, there was the first mass exodus of people leaving and that were PCSing. So they let everybody ETS that was going to ETS. They let everybody PCS that was going to PCS. So I PCSed at that time. So I didn't go on the second tour with them. I went with another unit at the same time, but with another unit. And it was right during that time that we got the orders that we were going to be deploying again. So I would say like March, April timeframe, they were like, hey, we're going to be going a year from now. Like, get ready to go. And that started that massive cycle of the train. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they didn't have that 2-year train up like we did. It was like, hey, you got a month to do the basic stuff and go to ranges. Hey, you have a month to do your platoon, squad, ex-eval, team ex-evals. Then you get your brigade thing. Then you go to NTC and you're certified. And then, oh yeah, you're going back to war right now.
And so, and I don't want to be critical of the Army or the people, but like what you're describing is what most units did for their train up, for their workup, not what you guys did for your Blackhawk Company workup, which was a very robust, rigorous train up. Like it was almost like deployments and redeployments on an industrial kind of scale. And when you mass produce units that are ready to go to combat like that, the quality of training, I would imagine, goes down.
Like I said before, combat effective leaders and combat effective troops are not born once you get the combat. It happens during training with the time to make those mistakes that you're going to make downrange before you get downrange. If you expedite the process and throw in a bunch of new guys, so you don't get the integration process and you don't get the continuity and you don't get the familiarity that you have with, say, we had for 2 years. The reason we were so successful and we were so lethal once we got the combat is because we trained for 2 years together. You knew what the man to your left and right could do. It wasn't even a question. It was just, hey, which battle drill are we executing this time?
That's right.
And you didn't have that later on. You just had to try to survive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. The soldiers who go back home are under a lot of pressure because they have this experience, right? And they go back home, and then I think people expect soldiers to be able to turn it off. You're no longer downrange, right? So, and let's just be real nuanced here. You know, the media and pop culture, they in a very demeaning way, I might add, focus in on a minority of soldiers who get into trouble when they get back, and they link it to their combat experiences. We're talking about a relatively small group of guys, right? But what you hear is like guys getting fights and guys getting a lot of trouble, and they link it back to their combat experience. How do you react to the way that is kind of portrayed in pop culture? Is it as bad, as dramatic, or am I wrong? Like, no, that's guys do get in a lot of trouble downrange, and how do you kind of react to that?
I would say you're right and you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I lost more soldiers and friends in between combat deployments than I ever did on combat deployments from what we determine as leaders to be risky behavior. Mm-hmm. Motorcycles, high-speed chases, weapons stuff that goes awry, drinking, drugs. Like, that's an absolute real thing because, I mean, what happened, no one knows exactly what happens to your brain for repeated exposure to combat. You know what I mean? that goes back to the whole thing is that the guys who came back from Vietnam and only did one tour, the guys who came back from World War II, they didn't have the pressure. The job was done. You get to reintegrate in society. Everybody thanks you for your service, blah, 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 blah. Our generation of combat warfighters, the war never ended. So you really can't quantify unless you got out of the service. It never ended for us. It just started the cycle, and you go back and you go back and you go back and you go back. So the guys you'd have so much adrenaline. And for anybody who's never been in a firefight and understands this, your body dumps so much adrenaline to keep you alive during the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels amazing. Amazing. That's why everybody's like, that's why they talk such good things. And they're like, when you're young and you survive everything and you're like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. It's because your body feels so good from the adrenaline. And when you survive that, you get this euphoric feeling and you're like, oh my God, this is awesome. This is the greatest thing ever. Let's go do this again. But then when you get home, you can't replicate that. There's no training environment that you can replicate a real live gunfire in. I don't care what they say.
Yeah.
Anybody who tells you that, they either never went to war or they're full of crap. So soldiers turn to drugs and alcohol and risky behavior because those on edge kind of things create that euphoric feeling that is as close to replicated combat feeling as you can get.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Joe. And I'll link it to a point you made earlier. During this time, you've got a lot of leaders who are coming out of who got to know these soldiers. They're leaving the unit and moving on to their next thing, their next assignment, right? And so the soldiers are probably feeling more isolated because they don't have their teammates, they don't have their leaders that took care of them, and critically know them. Like going back to you and James, knowing it's time to go grab a bottle of hooch and sit down and talk to James for an evening, right? Like when you got leaders who are leaving the unit and they leave behind their soldiers, they're more isolated and they're probably more likely to get into trouble, to have bad things happen.
I will tell you this too, and a caveat to the James Redding story.
Mm-hmm.
James Redding was stop lost, wanted out of the Army, wanted nothing to do with the Army. He was going to leave as soon as he can. I sent James Redding to the Staff Sergeant Promotion Board, to the E6 board. He took my position when I left. Re-enlisted, stayed in the Army, took my position, was my job, had my job when I left.
I mean, if that doesn't there's nothing else in the world that could possibly make you prouder than that.
When I left, every single person, I think except for one, all of the fire support NCOs that were in all of the other companies were all my guys.
Amazing. Let's talk about you we're going to wrap this thing up here pretty soon. I've taken up a lot of your time, but honestly, forgive me because this has just been a great conversation. I want to talk about you for a bit. So what are you up to these days, man, as a civilian?
I have the luxury of, I had a spinal cord injury at the end of my military career. Now I went to combat multiple times, never got hit by anything flying. They found a tumor when I came back from Afghanistan in 2012 in my spine, and I had to have spinal surgery. And then they made me retire early, basically. So I have the luxury of being home. So I have free time now that my kids are in school, and I write and I advocate for soldiers, and I give a voice to those that don't have a voice, that are either unwilling or unable to give a voice. And that's what I try to do. I tell the stories for people so that the world knows what we did.
It's awesome, man. How do you approach your mental health? How do you take care of yourself?
Dude, it was a struggle. I would be the biggest liar in the world if I stood here and told you that I transitioned and everything was great. It took me years to find my place in this world. When I was broken mentally, physically, every way you could be broken when I got out of the Army. I was at a loss. I couldn't connect. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what to do with my time. I went from being a leader in the Army to basically a cripple. I don't know how else to describe it. Like it was such a mental jolt, and it took me years and years of falling down and getting up and falling down and getting up. I mean, I came close to being one of those statistics. I'm not going to lie.
What advice do you have for soldiers who are suffering from post-traumatic stress, who are encountering some of the same things that you had?
You can't do it on your own. There's nothing good that comes out of doing things on your own. Like, share your story with people that are like you and have gone through similar situations that you. Don't share your story with someone who was a cook who sat on the fob and didn't do anything, because they're not going to be able to relate to what you're going through. Find people to share your story with. And I mean, it doesn't have to be group settings. It doesn't have to be this. Find that one person that you can unload all of that baggage on, because it's your baggage until it's not your baggage. And then the moment that it's not your baggage and it's somebody else's baggage, it takes that burden a little bit off of you. I mean, sharing with some of the people, like when I got out, I felt so isolated and like, you know, a failure. And it wasn't until I started talking to people, then everybody was like, man, I'm going through the same thing. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing I tell the soldiers that are going through stuff now. I mean, I'm still connected with almost every single soldier I've ever had in my life. Like, I call and I talk to them and I make phone calls and I'm like, hey, how are you doing? And I let them know, you know what I mean? You're not the only one. Dude, I went through this. I went through that. It's not just you. I can make it. You can make it. We'll make it together.
Great message. So true, my brother. Have you guys thought about a reunion, Blackhawk Company reunion?
So I know that 3rd Platoon, I think last year actually had a whole entire 3rd Platoon reunion. Now, one of the greatest things about 123 and stuff. Now, I know we talk about the legend of Blackhawk Company 123, but in reality, it should really be the legend of 123 Infantry. 123 Infantry is the greatest military organization I have ever been a part of in my life. And with that, the veterans are super tied in with the current command structure. And everyone who lives up there is in and out of there. They're in with trading. They're in with the events. Every time there's any kind of special event and remembrance, they have a big memorial up there that everybody goes out. The veterans are tied in with the current soldiers, kind of like First Armorez was with us. Mm-hmm. We pass that torch down to them and we give them advice and we're integrated. It's like a family atmosphere. So they do have reunions. We just haven't had a Blackhawk Company reunion per se.
Sounds pretty cool though.
It is. I mean, everybody's connected. We have a Blackhawk Company Facebook page where we get on there and post about everything and stay connected. We have battle rosters where we connect with each other. Like, if you're in trouble and you need help, you just make a phone call and I guarantee you're probably going to get the help that you need.
I have no doubt about that. Just getting to know you in this process and getting to know Rob and hearing about the guys. If there's ever a unit that has a great support network, it's yours. I'm speechless. Let's talk about your career as an author. Why did you do this?
Let me start by saying I was not going to be a writer with my career. That was never going to be what I was going to do. As the keeper of stories and kind of like the guy that everybody used to talk to, you know, a lot of people used to call me the smart guy, even though I'm not the smart guy. Like, I'm just a guy. I used to write these anniversary posts on Facebook and I would say a few words to people. And, you know, I have this incredible capacity for memory that I've been blessed with. You know what I mean? I'm not going to say photographic, but I can remember facts and figures and dates and stuff like that. So I got to talking a few years ago with Rob, and Rob was like, dude, you got to write this story. And I was like, I am not a writer. He's like, no, man, just write something, write anything. Start it out. Let's see what we got. And I was like, okay, let's see what we got. I wrote a little bit. Everybody loved it. You know what I mean? And they're like, oh man, we got to do this project, you know, and everybody writes a book or says they're going to write a book and everything. You know what I mean? I never thought I would actually do it. So I wasn't going to write a book. I was just going to write like a dictation of the deployment and kind of a recount of the deployment, and then kind of publish it for the guys that were in the unit to say, hey, this is what we done and this is what we accomplished. So when I first started interviewing people and trying to track down all of the information, no one wanted to talk to me about the war experience, you know what I mean? Because they didn't believe I was actually writing a book, which is fine, and I understand. If some dude called me up and they're like, hey, we're writing a war story, what's your experience? And I'm like, yeah, you know what? pound sand. I don't want to talk to you. So, but as it evolved, so I kept everybody I could in the loop and let them read what was important to them. You know what I mean? First platoon story, this is first platoon. Second platoon story, this. And they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Hold on, wait a second. You need to talk to this person, or you need to talk to this person. You need to talk to this person. And then like Swifty started calling me up. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you got the facts wrong. This is what needs to happen. Blah, 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 blah. So everybody kind of, and at the last minute before I was getting ready to publish, I probably had 50 people call me the last month. And they were like, hey, you got to put this in there. This part was in there. This is wrong. This is wrong. Blah, 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 blah. And it evolved into this giant thing. So over about 8 months of actual writing the book, evolved into the first product that we had, which I never had edited because I didn't think anybody was ever going to want to buy it. So I published it and was available for the guys in the company to get so they could say, hey, we have this book and it's ours. But the guys in the company, like I had one of the platoon sergeants call me and he was like, how did you know this detail? Like, how could you possibly know that? You weren't even there. Like, how do you know that this went down like this? I'm not saying it didn't. I just want to know how it did. How do you know that? But that's the level of detail that I had put into it. Like when I recreated the Battle of August 4th, it took me almost a month to do that battle because I got my hands on all the after action reports, all the mission logs, all the SIGACs from the talk that day. And then with the interviews for the soldiers that were on the ground in the different platoons, I mean, I knew what my platoon did that day, but I never knew what the other platoons did that day because I was too busy trying not to die. So that was my first time. And I recreated this battle on map boards and everything else, step by step by step by step. It broke it down. And oh yeah, I had the debriefs from insurgents who had been captured and the information that they gave about how the battle unfolded from that part. And that's where you get that perspective from. And it was this painstaking process. And like the guys who were on the ground that day, they had contacted me and they were like, dude, when I read that chapter, I feel like I'm back in the battle. It's so real. Like, this is the realest thing I've ever heard of in my life. Like, job well done. Like, you know what I mean? They're like, job well done. Like, and then it started taking off into something more. And I have no idea what to do, had no idea what to do next. You take a product, I don't know how to get published. I just published on Amazon at first because I didn't know how to contact people. And I lucked out and got in touch with the people who distribute through the PX. So the guys, it's Bird Enterprises. They do the sole distribution of all books and novels and all of the land nav books and everything else in clothing sales and in the PX. And the guy was like, hey, send me what you got. I heard about this story. I hear it's really good. I want to see what it is. So I sent it to him, and like he sent it back to me like the first day, and he's like, this is awful. It's not awfully, it's awfully written grammatically. Like, you're going to have this edited. So they hooked me up with an editor, and I got the book edited, and he was like, dude, this is great. And then the dude had a heart attack. So it was put on the shelf. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And after he recovered a few months later, he called me back and he's like, dude, we need to get this thing done now. So I gave him the updated stuff. They redid the cover for the book. It's about to launch like in the AFES online stores and in the clothing sales. And if you've ever been, anybody who's ever been to a clothing sales, the only books that are in clothing sales are Sergeant Audie Murphy, How to Win the Board, the Ranger Handbook, like those kind of books. Our story is going to be the first story in the clothing sales line about real soldiers in a real book.
And rightfully so, Joe. I read the book. This is the Amazon one. I read the book when I first met Rob. And I said in the intro, and I'll say it again, it is one of the best combat storytelling projects I have ever read. And I grew up on those old Vietnam books, you know, where, you know, about the guys who wrote about their experience. I grew up in that stuff, right? This right here is a masterpiece. And knowing how you went about it and knowing the amount of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears you put into this thing, I want to applaud you because it is a remarkable book. I tell I have my best friend's son is a platoon leader now in 223 down in Carson. And I told him he's got to read this thing, and he watches our podcast, and he had a lot of really cool things to say about Rob. And I know he'll say the same thing here to my buddy's son and all his buddies who are becoming platoon leaders, or, young NCOs who are coming up. You need to read this book. Okay. And we'll put the details in the comment section below, because it's an extremely important read if you are interested in what is expected of a leader leading troops into combat, or if you're a soldier, what's expected of you to be able to fight and survive in combat. This is the book, and it comes down to people, man. It comes down to people, and that's the thing I take away after reading it. Joe, just a great job. Do you have?
Well,
I'm sorry.
Sorry. One more thing too. Like, and one thing people understand, like, this isn't my story. I'm in the story, but it's not my story. This is all of the people who served in Blackhawk Company 123 Infantry story. I just happen to be the narrator of the story.
Yeah, that's right. What advice do you have for NCOs and soldiers who want to get into the author game? Because honestly, man, I don't see enough of it. I see a lot of like generals and, write stuff, and a lot of policy wonks here in DC write stuff. I don't see enough guys who are on the ground at the tip of the spear fighting, writing. What advice do you have?
I will say this, like, there's two parts to that. One, by the time warfighters, especially non-commissioned officers, get done with their time in service, they're so burnt out. The last thing they want to do is talk about their time in service.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of affects writing that interesting story or that battle that you might have gone through, because you just don't even want to talk about it anymore because you're so done. Because our generation went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 deployments. And when you're done doing that, you're just done and you don't want to write. The other piece is that NCOs as soldiers at the lowest level think that their story is not interesting. That's not true. Everybody's story adds value, whether it's teaching a lesson, whether it's showing what really happened, whether it's documenting history, whether it's transitioning to something else. And I will tell everyone who will listen to me that writing and putting my story, even if it's talking to myself, has healed me in ways that I can never describe. I am a complete whole person again because I was able to get out some of the things I could never even think about December the 8th, 2003 before without crying. I'm not going to lie. Like, broke down like a little tiny baby crying because there was so much emotion attached to that. And now I could have that conversation with you about real feelings about what was going on that day. So it's a healing process as well. But just because you think your story is not interesting doesn't mean it's not.
I can't say anything on top of that, my man. I think that there are guys like Joe, and there are some other NCOs who have entered the public space to talk about. You don't have to write a book. You can do a podcast. You can do whatever. Going out into the public space and sharing their experiences is, in fact, a heavy lift. That is true. But it's not just about sharing and teaching the next generation about what awaits them, because as you and I both know, we don't live in fantasy world. Like, there's going to be another war, right? It's also about what it can do for you. And I'm a big believer in writing. I'm a big believer in talking about it. And Joe, you've given me so much inspiration, man. This project was because of you. It's what basically went from this thing I always wanted to do for a long time. And reading this really made me want to do it, and actually got me to actually get off my ass and actually start doing it. And so I want to thank you for that. And you're such a great leader, and you're such a humble warrior. And I have a lot of admiration and respect for you, my brother. And I can't thank you enough for being here with me.
Thank you so much for having me on and let me tell my story and just talk. A lot of times we don't get to just talk.